To get what made Marcion so revolutionary, you have to picture the world he lived in. We're in the 2nd century, about 100 years after Jesus. And at this point, there's no New Testament. Not as a single book, anyway. What you have is a smattering of gospels, letters, and teachings floating around different Christian communities all over the Roman Empire. Think about it. There's no table of contents, no official, church-approved reading list. Some churches might treasure the Gospel of Matthew, while others swear by a version of Luke. Paul's letters were popular, sure, but so were dozens of other texts you won't find in a Bible today. It was a fluid, dynamic, and honestly, pretty chaotic time for Christianity. There was no central power to say, this is Scripture, and this isn't. It was a battle of ideas, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. And into this theological free-for-all steps one of the most important and controversial figures in church history, Marcion. Marcion was born around 85 AD in Sinope, a busy port city on the Black Sea. He was the son of a bishop and, more importantly, a rich shipowner. His money gave him one thing that mattered more than almost anything else: influence. Around 140 AD, he sailed to Rome, the heart of the empire, and dropped a massive donation of 200,000 sesterces on the local church, a gift that immediately got their attention. But Marcion didn't just bring cash. He brought an idea that would threaten to tear Christianity in two. After studying all the scriptures he could find, he reached a shocking conclusion. The God of the Old Testament could not be the same God Jesus called Father. He saw the God of the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh, as a lesser, flawed deity. Marcion called this being the demiurge, a creator god who was vengeful, judgmental, and obsessed with strict, unforgiving laws. This was the God who demanded sacrifices, wiped out humanity with a flood, and called himself a jealous God. To Marcion, this being was responsible for creating our broken, material world, a place filled with suffering. Then there was the God Jesus revealed. This was the true God, a distant, loving Father of pure mercy and grace. This God wasn't interested in the law. He offered salvation through faith and love. For Marcion, the math was simple. These were two different gods. One was the God of justice, the other was the God of love. And you simply couldn't follow both. This led him to his most explosive move. If the God of the Old Testament was an inferior deity, then the scriptures that told his story, the entire Old Testament, had to be rejected, erased. Marcion didn't just talk about his ideas, he put them into practice. He argued that to be a true Christian, you had to cut all ties with Judaism and its creator God. To make that happen, he did something nobody had ever done before. He created the first defined, closed canon of Christian scripture. He basically invented the idea of a New Testament. His canon, which he published around 144 AD, was brutally efficient. It had just two parts. First, the Evangelion, which was his version of the Gospel of Luke. But it wasn't the Luke we know. Marcion took a knife to it, slicing out any parts he saw as corruptions by pro-Jewish scribes. He cut out Jesus' entire birth story because he believed Jesus wasn't a real human, but only appeared to be one, a belief called Docetism. He also removed any link between Jesus and Old Testament prophecies. The second part was the Apostolicon, a collection of 10 letters from the Apostle Paul. Marcion believed Paul was the only true apostle, the only one who really got Jesus' message of grace over law. But even Paul's letters got a heavy edit to remove anything Marcion considered too Jewish. To cap it all off, he wrote his own book, The Antitheses, which laid out all the contradictions between the wrathful God of the Old Testament and the loving Father of Jesus. This collection, 1 edited gospel, 10 edited letters, and his own introduction, became the official Bible for his followers. It was the first time anyone had ever drawn a line in the sand and said, "These books are in, and all the others are out." Marcion's ideas weren't some fringe theory, they were a smash hit. After the church in Rome formally excommunicated him in 144 AD and gave him his massive donation back, he used his wealth and skill to build a rival church. Marcionite churches, with their own bishops and a simple, defined Bible, popped up all across the Roman Empire. His message resonated with many non-Jewish converts who struggled to square the violent and legalistic parts of the Old Testament with Jesus' message of love. Marcion gave them a version of Christianity that felt clean and logical. His movement became a genuine, powerful threat to the very soul of the emerging faith. The church fathers suddenly had a five-alarm fire on their hands. The established church leaders, guys we now call the church fathers, were horrified. They considered Marcion's teachings a complete nightmare. Polycarp of Smyrna, who was supposedly a disciple of the Apostle John, is said to have run into Marcion on a Roman street and called him the firstborn of Satan. But they knew name-calling wasn't going to cut it. Marcion had a clear, scripture-based argument. To beat him, they had to fight fire with fire. This challenge from their greatest rival forced the early church to get its act together. Theologians like Irenaeus, Justin Martyr, and Tertullian wrote thousands of pages against him. Tertullian famously wrote a 5-volume takedown called Against Marcion, accusing him of taking a knife to the scriptures, not a pen. They argued passionately that the story of salvation was one unified plan from one God. God, they said, is both just and merciful, and those qualities aren't contradictions. Most importantly, Marcion's move to create a canon forced the proto-Orthodox Church to define its own. The crisis he created was the catalyst. If Marcion had a list of sacred books, the Church needed one too. They had to go from a loose collection of respected texts to a formal, authoritative New Testament. It took centuries, but the framework for the New Testament we know today started to solidify as a direct response to Marcion. The Church set criteria for what made a book legit. Was it written by an apostle or someone close to them? Did it align with the core faith of the Church? Was it widely accepted and used by communities everywhere? Based on this, they didn't just accept one gospel. They affirmed 4: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They accepted Paul's letters, but also those from other apostles like Peter and John. And, in a direct rebuke to Marcion, they definitively embraced the Old Testament as Christian scripture, seeing it as fulfilled by Christ, not erased. Marcion's church thrived for hundreds of years, but was eventually overshadowed and faded from history. His version of the Bible was lost, and today, he's remembered as the arch-heretic. But his shadow is enormous. He was the first person to create a New Testament canon, and by doing so, he forced the very church he broke away from to build its own. It's one of the great ironies of history. The man who tried to rip the Bible in half is a key reason it was ultimately bound together. Though condemned for eternity, his challenge helped forge the Bible that sits on bookshelves all over the world. If you found this story about the forgotten battles that shaped the Bible interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the history of ideas. And let me know in the comments, do you see traces of Marcion's thinking around today? Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.